I got into a car accident and told my BF I was pressing charges, but he warned me to be careful because he's representing the other guy in court. I just smiled and said, "Good thing we're already in court, because now I can do this," and oh boy, he's furious. Okay, so around 10 days ago, I, 25 female, got into a car accident which absolutely wasn't my fault. The car was parked outside a friend's house, and I was sitting in the car waiting for her to show up. I was scrolling on the phone when all of a sudden another car crashed into mine from the back. The impact of that was really bad, and unfortunately, I ended up spraining my neck. I suffered from a severe spinal injury because I'd fallen off a ladder around 5 years ago, and this collision just aggravated that. The car crash led to a ligament in my neck being torn, and I've been in severe pain since then. I couldn't get out of my car to confront the driver of the other car, but as soon as my friend heard the crash, she'd come running out of the house and immediately called 911. When they arrived, we were both rushed to the hospital, and while nothing happened to the other guy, I ended up in a cervical collar. I wasn't too worried about my car since insurance would take care of that, but I did press charges against the guy who hit me. I didn't know what he was on since my car was literally parked, and the street we were on was wide enough to drive by without hitting anyone, so it was insane that he'd crashed right into my car. Because he'd been drinking, I knew that because when he visited me in the hospital room, he was still reeking of alcohol but had tried to cover up the smell with a disgusting mix of perfume and disinfectant. I told the police that I wanted to press charges that day itself. But the guy who hit me, I'll refer to him as Chris for the sake of clarity, was very well connected, and the DA refused to acknowledge it as anything other than an accident. They even tried to gaslight me into believing that I was parked in a really weird spot, and Chris had just swerved to avoid hitting a cat and had unfortunately ended up crashing into my car. I later found out that Chris was related to a really wealthy businessman, probably his nephew or something, I'm not sure, but anyway, that was how he managed to dodge the law. The car would be taken care of by my insurance company since I'd been in an accident, and I had all the proof, and the police report said so as well, but I wasn't satisfied with just that. This Chris guy had literally hit my car head-on and was most definitely drunk, so he owed me a lot more than a weak apology. There was also the issue of my healthcare, because I had to bear the entire cost of my visit, and trust me, it was an insane amount since I had to get some tests done, an x-ray, and I had to pay for the collar, plus medicines, and all of it came up to almost $22,000. My insurance wouldn't cover all of it since I didn't have to stay overnight, and neither did I have to spend 24 hours. I run my own small-scale bakery business, and I can afford to live nicely. I have a small apartment of my own, and I can afford rent, gas, electricity, water, and all the other essentials, and I can even afford to splurge once in a while, but the hospital bill was huge, and I absolutely cannot just afford to drop that sort of money without disrupting my budget for the month. And I can't exactly skimp on anything else either, I still have to pay my bills and buy groceries and stuff that I need for my bakery business. Also, it was just so infuriating that some drunk guy could drink and drive, hit my car, send me to the hospital, put me in excruciating pain and discomfort for the next God knows how many days, and still just get away with it because of his connections. So I decided to sue the guy, and since my boyfriend, 29 male, is a lawyer himself, my first choice was obviously him. That was a week ago, and we were having dinner when I told him about this. He got really uncomfortable when I told him about it and said that I should just drop it because it wouldn't be worth it to go after someone like Chris. I was taken aback by his attitude towards this, since he could see that I was in a lot of pain and knew that I'd had to spend a bomb on healthcare, and yet he wanted me to drop it. We got into a fight over it, and he told me that he was too busy to represent me in such a petty fight, which was just so hurtful and made me rethink my entire relationship with him. We've been together for only 6 months, but I've known him for a year and a half, and he's been my go-to person ever since we became friends. The way he behaved just didn't sit right with me, and even though I knew he was well respected in his field, I'd never imagined that he'd make me feel so small. I was actually aware of the difference in our income and position in society, but I tried my best not to feel inferior. Maybe being a baker wouldn't make me as wealthy as he aspired to be, and maybe it wasn't an important career, but I did what I loved, I had fun doing what I do, and most importantly, I didn't rely on my boyfriend for money. So he had no right to make me feel that way. I didn't speak to him after that because I was very hurt by what he'd said, so I approached a cousin of mine who just started out, and she was more than happy to help me file the petition against Chris. I didn't tell my boyfriend about any of this and had made up my mind to break up with him by the end of this week because he'd been really disrespectful, and I wasn't going to stand for it. But before I could call him, he decided to contact me yesterday. Chris was notified of the litigation process, and apparently, he'd hired my boyfriend to represent him in court, and he called me to warn me. He said I needed to be careful because I'd be up against a really good lawyer, so my case needed to be airtight. He even suggested that I stop the proceedings and settle out of court because if I did go ahead, I was destined to lose. I knew that this was just the other guy's way to play mind games with me and intimidate me into backing off, but it wasn't going to work. I did feel bad about the way my boyfriend was acting, though. For some reason, he thought this was funny. I was already hurting, not just physically but also emotionally, and that was enough to send me over the edge. So I told him it was a good thing that we were already in court because now I could dump him since it had turned into a conflict of interest for me. After saying that, I disconnected the call, and since I still wasn't feeling satisfied with what I'd done, I decided to call his sister up and tell her what he was up to. His sister and I are really close and have been for 5 years. We became friends in college, and after we graduated, she invited me to her house for Thanksgiving dinner one year, which is where I met my boyfriend. I told her all about what he'd done and the fact that he was about to defend a guy who's obviously been drinking and driving, knowing that his family would be all up in arms about it. They're all really into activism and are very strict about the causes they support, but my boyfriend doesn't really care. It always felt strange to me, but now I guess he's just not a very socially conscious guy, and I just wasted half a year of my life trying to be with someone who had no principles and would do anything for money. He's constantly at odds with his father, who's also an ex-lawyer but is active in the circuit and usually finds out what cases his son chooses through someone who knows someone, so my boyfriend can't exactly hide anything from his family either. His sister was also not on board with what he'd done and the way he was behaving, so she promised me that she'd look into it and make sure he apologized to me. She couldn't guarantee that he'd back out of the case, but she said that she'd make sure he was sorry for making me feel small and being arrogant. She told me that he had already not been on good terms with his family for a while now, and what I told her had just made it very clear to her that her brother was going down the wrong path and she couldn't take it.